Periodically throughout its history, the world has gotten into a mess. During times of war, it becomes a torture chamber for millions of human beings. True happiness, lasting happiness, lies only in God. Yoga teaches that where God is, there is no fear, no sorrow. The successful yogi can stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. These are the words spoken by Paramhansa Yogananda, the father of yoga in the West, who introduced Kriya Yoga and meditation to millions in the Western world, particularly in the United States. In this context, Yogananda is signifying that only in the realization of God or the divine presence can one be truly happy and free. In a more secular sense, to stand unshaken is to remain resilient in the face of chaos, to be so at peace with oneself that even the most catastrophic or cataclysmic events cannot unnerve them or break their stride. So when Rocco DeLuca borrowed these words in writing music for Red Dead Redemption 2, specifically for the songs Unshaken and Crash of Worlds, co-writer and producer Daniel Lanois realized these ideas could apply to Arthur Morgan and his quest for peace and redemption. And thus we get the opening chorus to Unshaken, sung by the very talented D'Angelo, whose lower vocal register really helps to establish the song's tone of vulnerability. The world is well and truly crashing down around Arthur. The gang is on the brink of collapse, having been on the run from the law for some time, made worse by their frequent attempts to make more money, which ultimately gains even more attention from the law and sees even more of their members killed. By this point in the story, near the end of chapter 5, Arthur and some gang members have just spent quite some time stranded on the island of Guam, where many of them had several near-death encounters. Upon his return to the United States, Arthur at first travels alone to avoid any unwanted suspicion. He is stressed, exhausted, and though he doesn't know it yet, terminally ill. But he knows he cannot rest. He must seek strength despite the catastrophes that are thrown at him. As he enters his final chapter, he needs the determination to persevere, to seek out meaning regardless of the challenges he faces with the law, and regardless of the opinions of those around him. Amidst the world crashing around him, Arthur must remain steadfast and stand unshaken. There's a passage from the Odes of the Roman lyric poet Horace that feels particularly relevant to these lyrics. One translation reads, "Should the whole frame of nature round him break, in ruin and confession hurled, he unconcerned would hear the mighty crack, and stand secure amidst a falling world." Which is to say that one who can remain stoic and steadfast in the face of such devastation is truly heroic, and the strength of their character is to be celebrated. I think Arthur is hoping to achieve such strength and stoicism. I don't think the opening lyrics are alone in being interpretive either. Whether intentional or not, all of the song's lyrics can be interpreted as reflective of Arthur's journey.
Did I hear a thunder? Did I hear you break?
Both of these lines are quite similar, with the second reinforcing the message behind the first. The thunder refers to a traumatic event, while the break refers to a breaking point. In the context of the entire game, I think this could obviously apply to Arthur's tuberculosis diagnosis, a traumatic event that completely shifts his worldview as we enter the final chapter. If we're specifically looking at the moment when the song plays though, I think it applies to the failed Saint Denis bank heist, in which two of Arthur's closest friends, Hosea and Lenny, were killed. Add to this the trauma involved in the shipwreck on Guam and the struggles in leaving the island. It wouldn't be amiss to describe this as a breaking point for Arthur, or the point at which the gang truly starts to break down in unity and trust.
I can't quite remember just what guided me this way.
Throughout the course of the game, Arthur often reflects on how the gang got into its situation, and more often than not, it can usually be attributed to the foolish actions of Dutch, inspired by the influential tongue of Micah. This is no different. Arthur is questioning how the gang got where it is, but perhaps for the first time, he's really admitting that it slipped away from him. He's not sure how the gang got into this mess so quickly, how they were able to lose sight of their original goals and ideals. And more than he has before, he's questioning Dutch, reflecting on his disillusionment with his leader and mentor whose vision and leadership have truly begun to show their cracks. And I think it's this confusion, this questioning of their motives, that will drive him throughout the last chapter of the game.
The pines, they often whisper, what no tongue can tell.
These lyrics seem almost like an answer to the age-old question, if trees could talk, what would they say? Questioning the knowledge that trees gain but cannot share after hundreds and thousands of years on the planet. And since pines are known for their longevity and often associated with long life and wisdom, it seems only fitting that they would whisper the darkest and most well-kept secrets. While the lyrics whisper what no tongue can tell might suggest that the trees possess knowledge beyond human understanding, in the context of the game I don't think it's that mysterious. I don't think can means that humans are physically unable to tell, but rather they lack the willingness to do so. The trees have witnessed the activities of the Vanderling gang, including the full truth of their behaviours and the inevitable downfall, which none of its members seem willing to discuss or acknowledge, even if they do sense it on a subconscious or conscious level. Along those lines, it may imply or represent Arthur's awareness of these whispers. Perhaps he cannot fully listen to them, but he is aware of them, of the futility of the life that he has led, and perhaps even the futility of trying to see the gang's activities to the full conclusion that Dutch foresees.
You drank from the deep water, may he know the depths of the well.
From a holistic perspective, these lyrics represent that true understanding is obtained through experience, that to have strength one must confront the complexities of life. In the context of the game, to drink from the deep water is to enter a life of crime to seek riches. But to know the depths of the well is to face the consequences of one's actions, to be aware of the darkest facets of society. More specifically, the depths of the well could be interpreted as the guilt, suffering, and reckoning that Arthur is faced with around this time. In other words, the consequences of his actions. In maintaining loyalty to the gang and following a life of crime, Arthur must confront the truths that accompany it. By drinking from the water, he is faced with the depths of the well. Perhaps then the lyrics are a warning to others, that outlaws who commit their first crimes should consider the full consequences of their actions before doing so, not only on themselves, but on their victims and loved ones. It is not an inevitability that one crime will graduate onto another more severe one, but it is suggested that the possibility of doing so increases exponentially. So to avoid the deep water entirely would ensure the depths of the world needn't ever be considered.
Oh, traveler, what have you seen? Where the crossroads, where you been, where you been?
The concept of a crossroads is surprisingly appropriate for the game, considering the choices that the player can make, both within the narrative and outside of it. It's also appropriate within the journey of Arthur, almost certainly the traveler in question, as he is often forced to make significant decisions regarding morality, for himself, or loyalty to the gang, especially in the chapter to come. Arthur questioning what he's seen and where he's been feels especially appropriate considering recent narrative events too. He's just been stranded on a foreign island for some time, with the 4 gang members with whom he is perhaps the least ideologically aligned, the 4 men who will ultimately betray him when the time comes. The island in question was also apparently similar to where Dutch ultimately wanted the gang to thrive, away from the United States, away from civilization and civilized society, but it turned out to be an even bigger mess than where they came from to begin with. They truly are at a crossroads, and Arthur's path has become a lot clearer, even if it's perhaps not fully defined just quite yet.
I once was standing tall, now I feel my back's against the wall.
In the overall narrative, it's easy to interpret this as foreshadowing of Arthur and the gang's betrayal at the hands of Micah, but I think it can be interpreted in the current sense. The gang once stood tall, making money successfully and discreetly with little interruption, but since the start of the game, they've constantly been on the run from the law, and increasingly so, having been essentially forced to leave the country to get away. Their backs are against the wall, and they have little time remaining before they are forced to surrender or escape for good. On a more personal level, Arthur once stood tall within the gang, acting as Dutch's primary enforcer, his lieutenant. But as Arthur works to clean up Dutch's mess while also remaining true to his own beliefs, he becomes disillusioned with his goals. And simultaneously, Dutch starts to trust him less as his own sanity spirals, instead replacing Arthur's role with Micah. Arthur has his back against the wall. He has realized that their way of life is unsustainable with the world closing in on him, leaving him with little choice but to try and see it end smoothly, with his friends escaping peacefully.
When it comes to me, it was there, but I could not see.
The morning light, literally the light that shines in the morning, allows one to see more clearly after hours and hours of darkness. Metaphorically then, this refers to one being able to understand things with more clarity, more truth. In the context of the game, Arthur had this morning light hit him some time ago, but he was unable to see it. He had moments of clarity and redemption available to him, but his loyalty to the gang blinded him to them. He couldn't see the truth behind Dutch and his actions until it was too late, until the people he loved suffered. Arthur is regretful for not changing his lifestyle or his attitude towards it until the consequences were irreversible.
And I don't wonder, as a wayward son, will the hunter be haunted by the smoke and gun?
To be wayward is to be disobedient or rebellious, to turn away or deviate from the expected or right behavior. Arthur is questioning if he is destined to forever stray from the right path and wander aimlessly without a sense of direction or purpose. He questions if he can ever find peace or redemption, or if he is destined to continue his wrongful actions and disobedience in the name of loyalty for Dutch and the gang forever. And should he be destined down this path forever, he knows that his time is limited, that he would be hunted by the smoking gun. Arthur is the hunter, the enforcer, living by his gun to enforce the gang's will wherever necessary, without question. But more recently, the gang itself is being hunted by the law as a result of their own reckless behavior, the smoking gun, the consequences of their own actions. These lyrics are essentially Arthur's acknowledgement that by continuing to wander as a wayward son, he will continue to be hunted, that those who live by violence will eventually see their terror come to an end by the hand of the law. Justice will catch up to them eventually. These last two verses signal Arthur's realization of his growing vulnerability. The gang, once known for its strength and its use of its force against others, is being hunted down and destroyed using the same force. It's the ultimate role reversal, and one that hangs a cloud across the entirety of the game, especially its second half, and drives its emotional depth and Arthur's quest for meaning and redemption. Unshaken certainly isn't the last vocal track to be used at a pivotal moment in the story. The fans of the first Red Dead Redemption will know that it's also not the first in this franchise. When John enters Mexico for the first time, we're treated to the beautiful song Far Away by Jose Gonzalez, and some players have identified significant differences between these two moments. That while Far Away accompanies a beautiful moment in which John enters a new location for the first time, Unshaken simply sets atop Arthur riding through a place with which we're already quite familiar. And while that's a reasonable comparison and a logical opinion, I think it's missing a somewhat crucial element. The world is different. Sure, it's physically the same. If anything, it's more familiar than the unpredictable and chaotic world of Guarma from which we've recently escaped. But the United States that Arthur has returned to is much different than the one he left. They're no strangers to running from the law, but this is a whole new level for the gang. They have very little anonymity, almost nowhere left to run, and have suffered devastating losses, including most notably Hosea, one of the most influential voices in the group, and importantly, its voice of reason. So it's left to Arthur to be the voice of reason, to try and keep the gang sane, and to try and protect his family and get them out of their chaotic predicament alive, all while battling the most intense demons of his own. Life has changed, the world is crashing. It's not so easy to stand unshaken anymore.
I miss the crash of a world.